Gary Tennant had been riding the same stretch of highway between Boise and Reno for 11 years. He knew where the wind cut hard enough to lean into, where the asphalt turned soft in August, and which rest stops had working coffee after midnight. He rode with 3 men who'd become constants not through ceremony but through repetition. They didn't call themselves a club. They didn't wear patches. They were just 4 guys who worked different jobs in different towns and met up twice a year to put miles behind them. Dennis Kowalski was the oldest at 52. He worked maintenance at a grain elevator outside Twin Falls and owned a 1998 Electra Glide he'd bought used and never customized. He didn't talk much. He didn't need to. When something went wrong on the road, Dennis was the one who pulled over first and got his hands dirty without being asked. Ray Ochoa was 41 and divorced. He managed a hardware store in Elko and lived above it in a 1-bedroom with blinds that didn't close all the way. He'd been riding since his 20s, back when it meant something different to him. Now it was just what he did when he had 3 days off and nowhere else he needed to be. Marcus Lyle was the youngest at 36. He taught high school history in Meridian and spent his summers on contract doing curriculum work for the state. He rode a Sportster he'd inherited from an uncle and never felt entirely comfortable on it, but he showed up every time Gary called. That counted for something. They met at a truck stop outside Mountain Home on a Friday in late September. The weather was clear and cooling fast. They fueled up, checked tires, and drank bad coffee from paper cups while standing in the parking lot. No one asked about work or family. No one mentioned how long it had been. They just got on their bikes and headed west. The ride to Reno was supposed to take 9 hours with stops. They'd done it enough times that the rhythm was automatic. Gary led because he always led. Dennis rode sweep. Ray and Marcus stayed in the middle and kept the pack tight. They didn't ride fast. They didn't need to. The point was to cover distance, not prove anything. They crossed into Oregon just after noon and stopped for gas in Ontario. The wind had picked up. The sky was flat and pale, and the light had that thin quality it gets before autumn really sets in. They ate lunch at a diner that smelled like fryer grease and burnt coffee. No one said much. Ray checked his phone twice and put it back in his jacket. Marcus ordered a burger and didn't finish it. Gary was looking at a paper map he kept folded in his saddlebag. He spread it across the table and tapped a section of empty space between 2 state routes. "There's a cut-through," he said. "Fire road. Comes out near the state line, saves us 30 miles, maybe 40. Dennis looked at the map but didn't touch it. "You run it before?" "Once, long time ago." "It maintained?" "It was dirt packed down. No worse than half the roads out here." Ray leaned in. "BLM land?" "Yeah." "They care?" "Never saw anybody." Marcus wiped his hands on a napkin and stood up. "How much time does it cut?" "Hour, maybe more." Dennis folded his arms. "We don't need to save an hour." Gary refolded the map. "I'm just saying it's there." No one said anything for a moment. Ray looked out the window at the bikes parked in a row under the noon sun. Marcus checked his phone again. Dennis finished his coffee and set the cup down gently. "We stick to the highway," Dennis said. Gary nodded. "Yeah, that's fine." They paid and walked back out into the wind. They got back on the bikes and rode west on 20 for another 2 hours. The land flattened out and turned pale yellow under a sky that never seemed to change. There were no towns, no buildings, just fence lines and cattle guards and the occasional dirt road that led to nothing they could see. Gary was still thinking about the fire road. He didn't know why. It wasn't about saving time. It was about the fact that it existed and he remembered it, and no one else did. That was enough to keep it in his head. At a junction near Harper, he slowed and signaled. The others followed him onto a 2-lane state route that headed south. Dennis pulled up beside him at the next stop sign. "This isn't the highway," Dennis said. "I know. We voted." "We didn't vote. You said stick to the highway. I heard you." "Then why are we here?" Gary looked at him. "Because I'm leading." Dennis held his gaze for a few seconds, then dropped back into formation. They rode for another 30 minutes. The road narrowed and the pavement turned rough. Gary slowed as they passed a rusted cattle gate on the left side of the road. Beyond it, a dirt track ran into low hills covered in sagebrush. There was a metal sign nailed to a post, half hidden in tall grass. The paint was faded and the words were barely visible. Gary turned onto the dirt road. The others followed. No one stopped to read the sign. The fire road was exactly as Gary remembered it, wide enough for two vehicles, graded flat in the center, loose gravel on the edges. The surface was dry and hard-packed. Dust rose behind them in thin clouds that hung in the still air and settled slowly. The terrain on both sides was open range, no trees, just low brush and scattered rock outcrops that cast short shadows in the afternoon light. They rode single file now. Gary kept his speed down to 35. The road curved gently through shallow draws and over low rises. There were no tire tracks, no footprints, no signs that anyone had been through here recently. The silence was total, except for the sound of their engines. After 20 minutes, Ray pulled up closer to Marcus and tapped his helmet, pointing off to the right. Marcus looked but didn't see anything. Ray dropped back. Dennis was watching the road behind them. He didn't like the dust. It made them visible from a long way off, and even though there was no one out here to see them, the visibility bothered him. He'd spent enough time on back roads to know that being seen meant being remembered. Gary checked his odometer. They'd come 3 miles. The cutoff to the state highway was supposed to be another 4 or 5 miles ahead, where the fire road met a county route that connected back to 95. He'd ridden it in daylight last time, coming from the opposite direction. He remembered it being faster than this. He also remembered there being more landmarks, a windmill, a stock tank, something. Out here, everything looked the same. Marcus was riding with his head down, watching the road directly in front of his tire. He didn't trust the gravel. The Sportster wasn't made for this kind of surface, and he could feel the rear end sliding slightly every time he accelerated. He thought about saying something but didn't. Gary had made the call. They were already committed. The road dropped into a shallow drainage where the brush grew thicker. A dry creek bed ran parallel to the road on the left, lined with smooth stones and patches of cracked mud. Gary slowed further as the road curved around a slight bend. On the far side, the drainage widened and the ground leveled out. That's when Marcus saw the tarp. It was off to the right, maybe 30 yards from the road, near what looked like an old irrigation ditch. The tarp was desert tan, military style, stretched flat on the ground, and weighted down at the corners with rocks. It didn't belong. Everything else out here was weathered and faded and half-buried. The tarp looked new. Marcus slowed and turned his head. Gary had already seen it. He eased off the throttle and let the bike coast to a stop. The others stopped behind him. No one spoke. Gary cut his engine. The others did the same. The silence came back, heavier now. There was no wind, no birds, just the faint ticking of cooling metal. Dennis put down his kickstand and stood up slowly, rolling his shoulders. He looked at the tarp, then at Gary. "What is that?" Ray said. "Don't know," Gary said. "We should keep moving," Marcus said. Gary was already walking toward it. Dennis followed. Ray stayed with the bikes for a moment, then walked after them. Marcus waited, then came last. They crossed the scrub and stopped a few feet from the tarp. It was bigger than it had looked from the road, at least 10 feet by 12. The rocks holding it down were smooth river stones, the kind you'd find in a creek bed but not sitting loose on flat ground. Someone had placed them there deliberately. Gary crouched and lifted one corner of the tarp. Underneath was a wooden crate, military surplus, stenciled with faded numbers. He pulled the tarp back further. There were 6 crates, all identical, all stacked neatly. The lids were loose. Dennis opened one. Inside were rifles. Civilian AR pattern, wrapped in clear plastic, packed tight with foam spacers. The foam was clean. The plastic wasn't yellowed. These hadn't been here long. Ray opened another crate, same thing. Handguns this time. Semi-automatic pistols, still in factory plastic, 20 or more. Marcus didn't open anything. He stood back with his hands in his jacket pockets and watched the road. Gary pulled the tarp all the way off and folded it without thinking. There were 8 crates total. He did a quick count in his head. Somewhere between 80 and 100 firearms. No boxes, no paperwork, no serial number tags visible through the plastic. "Jesus," Ray said quietly. Dennis stood up and stepped back. He looked around slowly, scanning the hills, the road, the empty drainage. There were no vehicles, no tire tracks except theirs, no footprints. "We need to go," Dennis said. Gary was still looking at the crates. Yeah, now. I know. Gary. Gary turned and walked back toward the bikes. The others followed. No one said anything, no one looked back. They got on their bikes and started the engines. Gary pulled onto the road and accelerated harder than before. The dust cloud behind them rose thicker and spread wider. Dennis watched it in his mirror and felt something tighten in his chest. They reached the county route in 12 minutes and turned north without stopping. The pavement was cracked and sun-baked, but it felt solid after the dirt. Gary pushed the speed up to 65. The others stayed close. No one spoke over the intercom. No one made a signal. They rode for another hour before Gary finally slowed at a junction where 95 split off toward the state line. He pulled into a gravel turnout and stopped. The others stopped beside him. Gary cut his engine and sat there with his hands on the grips. Ray took off his helmet and ran a hand through his hair. Marcus stayed on his bike with the engine running. Dennis walked a few steps away and stood with his back to them, looking out at the empty desert. "We don't talk about this," Gary said. No one answered. "Ever," Gary said. Ray nodded. Marcus cut his engine. Dennis turned around. "You should have stayed on the highway." "I know. We all know." Gary put his helmet back on. "Let's just get to Reno." They got back on the road and rode the rest of the way in formation, keeping the speed steady and the distance tight. They reached the outskirts of Reno just after dark and stopped at a motel off 395 with a parking lot big enough for the bikes. They checked into separate rooms and didn't meet for dinner. Gary sat on the edge of his bed with the television on and the sound turned down. He didn't watch it. He was thinking about the tarp and the crates and the way the plastic had looked in the sunlight, clean and new and completely out of place. He thought about calling Dennis but didn't. He thought about the map in his saddlebag and the fire road he'd chosen, and the 30 miles he'd wanted to save. He turned off the light and lay there in the dark, listening to the sound of trucks on the highway. They left Reno separately the next morning. No group breakfast, no plan to meet up. Gary was the first one out just after dawn. He filled his tank at a station near the motel and saw Marcus pulling out of the parking lot 2 cars back. Marcus raised a hand. Gary nodded. Neither of them stopped. Dennis left an hour later and took a different route north, avoiding 95 entirely. He rode back roads through Winnemucca and up through the edges of Idaho, adding miles he didn't need but feeling better for it. He stopped once for gas and once for coffee and didn't talk to anyone. Ray stayed in Reno until checkout. He sat in his room with his phone in his hand and thought about calling his ex-wife, though he couldn't say why. He didn't call. He packed his bag and loaded the bike and rode east toward Elko with the throttle open and his head clear. When Gary got back to Boise 3 days later, he parked the bike in his garage and didn't look at it for a week. He went to work. He came home. He watched television and ate dinner standing at the kitchen counter. His wife asked him how the trip went. He said it was fine. She didn't ask anything else. Marcus returned to Meridian and started teaching again on Monday. His students asked where he'd been over the weekend. He told them he'd gone riding with some friends. One of them asked if it was fun. He said, yeah, it was fine. He didn't bring it up again. Dennis didn't tell anyone he'd been gone. He lived alone and worked alone, and no one at the grain elevator asked him about his time off. He showed up on Tuesday morning and climbed the ladder to check the conveyor belts and didn't think about the fire road or the crates or the tarp folded neatly in the dirt. Ray opened the hardware store at 7 a.m. like always and spent the day restocking shelves and running the register. A regular customer asked if he'd done anything interesting lately. Ray said no, just worked. The customer nodded and paid for his screws and left. For 2 weeks, none of them communicated. The group text stayed silent. No one called. No one sent a message. It wasn't a decision, it was just what happened. On a Thursday in mid-October, Gary got a call from a number he didn't recognize. He let it go to voicemail. The message was from an agent with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. The agent said his name was Collier. He said he was working a case involving firearms recovered from federal land in eastern Oregon. He said Gary's name had come up in the course of the investigation. He left a number and asked Gary to call him back. Gary listened to the message twice, then deleted it. He sat at his kitchen table and stared at his phone. His wife was at work. The house was quiet. He thought about calling Dennis. He thought about calling Ray. He didn't call anyone. The next morning, Agent Collier called again. This time, Gary answered. Collier was polite. He didn't accuse Gary of anything. He said he was just trying to establish a timeline. He said a Park Service drone had recorded images of 4 motorcycles on a restricted fire road in Malheur County on September 27th. He said the images included license plates. He said Gary's plate was one of them. Gary asked if he needed a lawyer. Collier said that was up to him, but right now this was just a conversation. Gary asked what the charges were. Collier said there were no charges, not yet. He said they were still gathering information. Gary asked what Collier wanted. Collier asked if Gary had ridden through Malheur County on September 27th. Gary said yes. Collier asked if he'd been alone. Gary said no. Collier asked who he'd been with. Gary gave him the names: Dennis Kowalski, Ray Ochoa, Marcus Lyle. Collier thanked him and ended the call. Dennis got the call 2 days later. Same agent, same tone. Dennis didn't delete the voicemail. He listened to it once, then called Gary. "They got your name from me," Gary said. "I know. I didn't have a choice." "I know. What did you tell them?" "Nothing yet. He just left a message. He's going to call back." "I know. Don't lie to him." "I'm not going to lie. Just tell him what happened." "What happened?" "We rode through. We didn't stop. We didn't see anything." Dennis was quiet for a moment. "We stopped. We stopped for 30 seconds. We saw it. We didn't touch it." "Doesn't matter." "It has to matter." Dennis didn't answer. He was standing in his kitchen looking out the window at the grain elevator in the distance, the big cylindrical tanks white against the gray sky. "You should get a lawyer," Dennis said. "I don't need a lawyer. Gary, I didn't do anything wrong." "Neither did I." "Then we'll be fine." Dennis hung up. Ray got the call on a Sunday morning. He was in his apartment above the hardware store, drinking coffee and watching a football game he wasn't following. When Collier said his name, Ray felt his stomach drop. He answered all of Collier's questions. Yes, he'd been on the fire road. Yes, he'd been with Gary Tennant, Dennis Kowalski, and Marcus Lyle. Yes, they'd seen something. Collier asked what they'd seen. Ray told him: crates, tarps, rifles, and handguns. Collier asked if they'd touched anything. Ray said no. Collier asked if they'd taken anything. Ray said no. Collier asked why they hadn't reported it. Ray didn't have an answer. Collier thanked him and said someone might be in touch. Ray sat on his couch for an hour after the call ended. He thought about calling Gary. He thought about calling Dennis. He thought about driving to Meridian and finding Marcus and asking him what the hell they were supposed to do now. He didn't do any of those things. He finished his coffee and turned off the television and went downstairs to open the store. Marcus got the call on a Monday during his lunch break. He was sitting in his car in the school parking lot eating a sandwich when his phone rang. He saw the federal area code and almost didn't answer. Then he did. Collier introduced himself. Marcus stopped chewing. The questions were the same. The answers were the same. Yes, he'd been there. Yes, he'd seen the crates. No, he hadn't touched them. No, he hadn't reported it. Collier asked why. Marcus said he didn't know. Collier asked if anyone in the group had discussed what to do. Marcus said no. Collier asked if Gary Tennant had told them not to report it. Marcus said no. Collier asked if Marcus was sure. Marcus said yes. Collier thanked him and ended the call. Marcus sat in his car with the sandwich in his lap and his hands shaking. A student walked past and waved. Marcus waved back. The student kept walking. Marcus threw the sandwich in the passenger seat and started the car. He drove home and called in sick for the rest of the day. He sat in his living room and stared at his phone and thought about the fire road and the tarp and the way Gary had folded it without thinking, like it was something that needed to be put away neatly. He thought about the group text that hadn't been used in 2 weeks. He thought about calling Gary and asking him why he'd given their names to the ATF. He didn't call. He turned off his phone and sat there in the quiet house and felt something inside him close. 2 weeks after the calls, Agent Collier came to Twin Falls. He didn't call ahead. He showed up at the grain elevator just before noon on a Wednesday and asked to speak with Dennis Kowalski. The supervisor found Dennis on the catwalk checking a belt tensioner. Dennis climbed down and met Collier in the break room. Collier was younger than Dennis expected. Mid-30s, clean-cut, wearing khakis and a polo shirt with the ATF logo on the chest. He had a folder under his arm and a recording device in his hand. "I'd like to ask you a few more questions," Collier said. "You can have a lawyer present if you want." "Am I under arrest?" "No." "Am I being charged with something?" "Not at this time." Dennis sat down. "Then ask." Collier set the recorder on the table and pressed record. He opened the folder and slid a photograph across to Dennis. It was an aerial image, black and white, timestamp in the corner. 4 motorcycles on a dirt road. The resolution was good enough to read the license plates. "That's you," Collier said. Dennis looked at the photo. "Yeah. September 27th, Fire Road off State Route 78, restricted area. I didn't see a sign." "There was one." "I didn't see it." Collier pulled out another photograph. Same angle, different timestamp. The motorcycles were stopped. 4 figures standing near a tarp. "What were you doing here?" Collier asked. "Looking." "At what?" "Crates." "Did you open them?" "One." "What was inside?" "Guns." "How many?" "I didn't count." "More than 10? "Yeah." "More than 50? "Probably." Collier nodded and made a note. "Did you take anything?" "No." "Did anyone in your group take anything?" "No." "You're sure?" "Yes." Collier pulled out another photo. This one was a close-up of the tarp after it had been removed. The crates were visible, lids open, empty. "When we recovered these crates 3 days later," Collier said, "they were empty." Dennis stared at the photo. "We didn't take anything." 87 firearms, all gone. "We didn't take them." "Then who did?" "I don't know." Collier leaned back in his chair. "Someone came back, within 72 hours of you being there, took everything, left the crates." Dennis didn't say anything. "That's a tight window," Collier said. "Makes me think whoever came back knew we were watching, knew they had to move fast." "We didn't tell anyone."
You sure about that?
"Yes." "Gary Tennant didn't make any calls?" "I don't know what Gary did." "Ray Ochoa?" "I don't know." "Marcus Lyle?" Dennis shook his head. "I don't know." Collier closed the folder. "You guys ride together a lot?" "Couple times a year." "Close group?" "We're friends." "Good friends?" Dennis looked at him. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to tell me if anyone in that group contacted someone about what you found." "No." "You're certain?" "I'm certain." Collier turned off the recorder and stood up. He left the photos on the table. "We'll be in touch." Dennis watched him leave. He sat there for a few minutes looking at the aerial photo, at the 4 motorcycles stopped on the road, at the shapes of men standing around something they shouldn't have found. He picked up the photo and looked at it closely. He could see himself in it, second from the left, hands at his sides, standing back from the others. He put the photo down and went back to work. Ray got the visit 2 days later. Collier came to the hardware store on a Friday afternoon when the place was empty, except for Ray and 1 part-time kid stocking shelves in the back. Collier showed his badge and asked if they could talk somewhere private. Ray took him to the office. Collier went through the same questions, same photos. Ray gave the same answers Dennis had given. They didn't take anything. They didn't tell anyone. They left and went straight to Reno. Collier asked about phone records. Ray said he didn't make any calls. Collier asked about the group text. Ray said they hadn't used it. Collier asked if that was normal. Ray said no. "Why not?" Collier asked. "We just didn't." "You always text after a ride?" "Usually." "But not this time." "No." "Why?" Ray didn't answer right away. He was sitting behind the desk with his hands folded looking at the ATF logo on Collier's chest. "Because we didn't want to talk about it," Ray said finally. Collier nodded. "That makes sense to you? You find 100 guns in the middle of nowhere and nobody wants to talk?" "It made sense at the time." "Why?" "Because we didn't know what we'd found." "You knew it was illegal." "We didn't know whose it was." "So you left it?" "Yeah." "And didn't report it?" "No." "Why not?" Ray looked at him. "Because we didn't want to get involved." Collier made a note. "How'd that work out?" Ray didn't answer. Collier showed him the photo of the empty crates. He asked the same question he'd asked Dennis. Who came back? Who took the guns? Ray said he didn't know. Collier asked if Ray had contacted anyone after the ride. Ray said no. Collier asked if Gary had. Ray said he didn't know. But you think he might have, Collier said. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Ray stood up. Are we done? Collier closed his folder. For now. He left the store and Ray stood at the window watching him walk to a plain sedan parked across the street. Collier got in and sat there for a minute, writing something. Then he drove away. Ray went back to the register and stood there with his hands on the counter. The part-time kid came out from the back and asked if everything was okay. Ray said yeah, everything was fine. The kid went back to stocking shelves. Ray pulled out his phone and opened the group text. The last message was from Marcus 2 days before the ride. It said, "See you Friday." Ray typed, "We need to talk." He stared at it for a long time. Then he deleted it and put the phone away. Marcus got the visit at school. Collier showed up during 7th period and waited in the front office. The principal came to Marcus's classroom and told him there was someone who needed to speak with him. Marcus followed her to the office and saw Collier standing by the window. The principal left them alone. Collier didn't sit down. He asked his questions standing. Marcus answered them the same way the others had. No, they didn't take anything. No, they didn't tell anyone. No, he didn't know who came back for the guns. Collier asked about Gary. Marcus said Gary had led the ride. Collier asked if it was Gary's idea to take the fire road. Marcus said yes. Collier asked if Gary had been on that road before. Marcus said Gary said he had. Collier asked if Marcus believed him. Marcus hesitated. I don't know. Why don't you know? Because he didn't remember it, right? What do you mean? He said it would save us time. It didn't. He said there'd be landmarks. There weren't. He acted like he knew where we were going, but I don't think he did. Collier wrote that down. You think he was lost? I think he was guessing. Why would he do that? I don't know. You think he led you there on purpose? Marcus looked at him. No. You sure? Yes. Then why bring it up? Marcus didn't answer. Collier showed him the photo of the empty crates. 87 firearms gone. Somebody knew right where to go. Somebody knew we were watching. Somebody moved fast. It wasn't us. Then who was it? I don't know. Gary, no? I don't know. You talked to him after the ride? No. At all? No. Why not? Marcus looked at the floor. Because I didn't want to. Collier studied him for a moment. You blame him? Marcus didn't answer. You think he should have stayed on the highway? Yeah. You tell him that? No. Why not? Because it wouldn't change anything. Collier closed his folder. We're going to need you to come in for a formal interview. Bring a lawyer if you want. Am I being charged? Not yet. Marcus felt his chest tighten. What does that mean? It means we're still investigating. Collier handed him a card. Call this number, set up a time. He left the office. Marcus stood there holding the card, staring at the phone number printed at the bottom. The bell rang. Students poured into the hallway. Marcus walked back to his classroom and sat at his desk and waited for them to settle down. A girl in the front row asked if he was okay. He said he was fine. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't ask again. Gary got the visit last. Collier came to his house on a Saturday morning. Gary's wife answered the door and called Gary down from upstairs. Gary came down and saw Collier standing in the entryway. His wife looked at Gary, then at Collier, then went into the kitchen. They sat in the living room. Collier went through the photos. Gary confirmed everything. Yes, they'd been there. Yes, they'd seen the guns. No, they didn't take anything. Collier asked why Gary had chosen that route. Gary said it was shorter. Collier asked if Gary had been there before. Gary said yes once. Collier asked when. Gary said he didn't remember, maybe 5 years ago. Collier asked if Gary had talked to anyone after the ride. Gary said no. Collier asked if anyone in the group had talked to him. Gary said no. Collier leaned forward. You gave me their names pretty quick when I first called. You asked. Most people would have said they needed to think about it. Check their records. You gave me 3 names in under 10 seconds. Gary didn't say anything. Why is that? Collier asked. Because I remembered. Or because you knew this was coming. I didn't know anything. Collier showed him the photo of the empty crates. Someone came back. Someone who knew exactly where to go. Someone who knew we'd be looking. It wasn't me. Then who? I don't know. You didn't call anyone, text anyone, mention it to a friend? No. Not even your wife? Gary looked toward the kitchen. No. She know you rode through restricted land? She knows we took a detour. She know what you found? No. Collier made a note. Your buddies aren't saying much either. Dennis, Ray, Marcus, all telling the same story. All saying they didn't take anything. All saying they didn't tell anyone. Because we didn't. Then explain the empty crates. I can't. Try. Gary exhaled. Maybe someone else found it. Maybe whoever put it there came back. Maybe it had nothing to do with us. 72 hours after you were there? That's one hell of a coincidence. I don't know what else to tell you. Collier stood up. We pulled phone records. Yours, Dennis's, Ray's, Marcus's. We're going through them now. If anyone made a call, sent a text, did anything that connects back to those guns, we'll know. Gary stood. Then you'll know we didn't do anything. Collier walked to the door. Gary's wife appeared in the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed. Collier nodded to her, then looked back at Gary. One of you is lying, Collier said, or all of you are. He left. Gary's wife came into the living room. What was that about? Gary sat down on the couch. Something we saw on the ride. What did you see? Guns out in the desert, someone's stash. She stared at him. And you didn't report it? No. Why not? Gary looked at her. Because I didn't want to get involved. Well, you're involved now. I know. She sat down beside him. Are you in trouble? I don't know. Gary. I don't know. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she stood up and went back into the kitchen. Gary heard the water running, heard dishes clinking in the sink. He sat there and stared at the empty doorway and thought about the fire road and the tarp and the way Dennis had looked at him when they got back on the bikes. He pulled out his phone and opened the group text. He typed, "We need to talk." He stared at it. Then he deleted it and put the phone away. 3 weeks after Collier's visits, Ray Ochoa was arrested at his apartment above the hardware store. It was early morning, just after 6. 2 ATF agents and a county sheriff's deputy came to the door with a warrant. Ray was still in his undershirt and jeans, hadn't shaved, hadn't had coffee. They told him to get dressed. He asked what the charges were. They said conspiracy to traffic in firearms. He asked if he could call a lawyer. They said he could do that at the federal building in Boise. They cuffed him in the hallway outside his apartment. The hardware store wasn't open yet, but a few people on the street saw him being walked to the sedan. One of them took a photo. By noon, it was on the local news site. Elko man arrested in federal firearms case. Ray didn't say anything during the drive to Boise. He sat in the back seat with his hands cuffed in front of him and watched the high desert pass by outside the window. The agents didn't talk to him. They didn't talk to each other. The only sound was the hum of the tires on asphalt and the occasional crackle of the radio. At the federal building, they processed him and put him in an interview room. Collier came in an hour later with a folder and a legal pad. He sat down across from Ray and opened the folder without looking at him. We pulled your phone records, Collier said. Found something interesting. Ray didn't respond. Collier slid a printout across the table. It was a call log. Ray's number highlighted in yellow. A single outgoing call on September 28th at 9:42 p.m. Duration, 4 minutes, 18 seconds. Who'd you call? Collier asked. Ray looked at the printout. I don't remember. That was the night after you found the guns. You're telling me you don't remember who you called? I don't. Collier pointed to the number on the printout. That's a prepaid cell. Bought at a Walmart in Winnemucca 3 months ago. Cash transaction. No name on the account. Ray said nothing. You know anyone in Winnemucca? No. Then why'd you call this number? I didn't. Collier leaned back. Ray, we've got the records. We've got the tower pings. Your phone made that call. 4 minutes. That's long enough to give someone directions. Long enough to describe what you saw. Long enough to tell them where to find it. I didn't make that call. Then someone used your phone. Nobody used my phone. Collier tapped the printout. This says otherwise. Ray looked at the number again. He didn't recognize it. He tried to remember that night. They'd gotten to Reno, checked into the motel. He'd gone to his room and sat on the bed and turned on the TV. He'd thought about calling someone. He'd thought about calling his ex-wife. He hadn't called anyone. Hadn't called. "I want a lawyer," Ray said. Collier closed the folder. "That's your right." They moved him to a holding cell. The public defender came 2 hours later. Her name was Halstead. She was in her 40s, tired-looking, carrying a briefcase that was splitting at the seams. She sat across from Ray in a consultation room and listened while he explained what happened. She took notes. When he finished, she set her pen down. "Did you make the call?" she asked. "No." "Do you know who did?" "No." "Could someone have used your phone without you knowing?" Ray thought about it. "I left it on the nightstand when I went to get ice." "How long were you gone?" 5 minutes, maybe less." "Was your phone locked?" "I don't remember." Halstead made a note. "That's not much of a defense." "It's the truth. Truth doesn't always matter. What matters is what they can prove." "They can't prove I made that call." "They can prove your phone made it. That's usually enough." Ray felt something cold settle in his chest. "What are they offering?" "Nothing yet. They're still building the case, but if they charge you with conspiracy, you're looking at 5 to 10 years. Maybe more if they tie you to the missing firearms." "I didn't take them." "But you saw them. You didn't report them. And your phone called someone who might have taken them. That's enough for a jury to convict." Ray put his head in his hands. "What do I do?" "You cooperate. You give them what they want. You testify against the others if they ask." "I'm not doing that." "Then you go to trial and you lose." "I didn't do anything wrong." Halstead looked at him. "You found 100 illegal firearms and you didn't report it. That's a crime. The question now is whether they can prove you did more than that." She left. Ray sat in the consultation room for another hour before they moved him back to the cell. He lay on the bunk and stared at the ceiling and thought about the phone call he couldn't remember making. The news about Ray's arrest reached the others the same day. Dennis saw it on the local news site during his lunch break. He read the article twice, then put his phone away and didn't look at it again. Marcus saw it in a text from a friend who lived in Elko. The text said, "Isn't this one of your writing buddies?" Marcus didn't respond. He turned off his phone and put it in his desk drawer. Gary's wife saw it first. She showed Gary the article on her tablet while he was eating breakfast. Gary read it and set the tablet down and finished his eggs without saying anything. "Did you know?" she asked. "No." "Do you think he did it?" "I don't know." "Gary?" He looked at her. "I don't know." She took the tablet back. "You need to call a lawyer." "I didn't do anything." "Neither did he, apparently, and he's in jail." Gary didn't argue. He finished his coffee and went to work. At lunch, he sat in his truck in the parking lot and called Dennis. Dennis didn't answer. Gary left a message. "It's me. Call me back." Dennis didn't call back. Gary tried Marcus, same result, no answer, no callback. That night, Gary's lawyer called him. His name was Pressler. He'd handled Gary's divorce years ago and some contract work for the business. Gary hadn't called him. Pressler said he'd seen the news. "You need to come in," Pressler said. "Why?" "Because if they arrested Ray, they're coming for the rest of you." "I didn't do anything." "That's what we're going to establish. But we need to do it now before they have time to build a case." Gary met him the next day at his office in Boise. Pressler was in his 60s, balding, with a gut that pressed against his shirt. He sat behind his desk with a legal pad and a pen and asked Gary to start from the beginning. Gary told him everything: the fire road, the tarp, the crates, the decision to leave, the phone call from Collier, the visit to his house. Pressler made notes. When Gary finished, Pressler set his pen down. "Did you make any phone calls after you found the guns?" "No." "Text anyone?" "No." "Email?" "No." "Did you tell your wife?" "Not until Collier came to the house." "What about the others, Dennis, Marcus?" "We didn't talk." "At all?" "No." Pressler leaned back. "That's going to be a problem." "Why?" "Because it makes it look like you coordinated, like you agreed not to talk." "We didn't agree to anything, we just didn't talk. A jury's not going to see it that way." Gary rubbed his face. "What did they have on Ray?" "Phone records. A call to a prepaid cell the night after you found the guns. They think he tipped someone off." "Ray didn't do that." How do you know? Because I know Ray. You said you haven't talked to him in weeks. Gary didn't respond. Pressler picked up his pen. Here's what's going to happen. They're going to offer Ray a deal. He testifies against you, Dennis and Marcus. They reduce his charges. If he takes it, you're all going down. He won't take it.
You sure about that?
Gary wasn't. Pressler stood up. I'm going to reach out to the U.S. Attorney's office, see what they're thinking. In the meantime, don't talk to anyone, not Dennis, not Marcus, not your wife. Nobody. I have to talk to my wife. Then don't talk about the case. Gary left the office and drove home. His wife was in the kitchen when he walked in. She turned and looked at him. What did he say? He said Ray might testify against us. Will he? I don't know. She crossed her arms. This is because you took that detour. Gary didn't answer. You should have stayed on the highway. I know. Then why didn't you? He looked at her. Because I thought I knew better. She turned back to the sink. Gary stood there for a moment, then went upstairs. He sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out his phone. He opened the group text and stared at the last message from Marcus. See you Friday. He typed, I'm sorry. He stared at it for a long time. Then he deleted it and put the phone away. Ray spent 3 days in federal custody before Halstead came back with an offer. The U.S. Attorney's Office was willing to reduce the charges to a single count of failure to report. No jail time, probation, a fine. All Ray had to do was testify. Ray asked what they wanted him to say. Halstead said they wanted him to confirm that Gary had led the group onto the fire road, that Gary had opened the crate, that Gary had told them not to report it. Ray asked if that was true. Halstead said it didn't matter. It was what they needed to hear. Ray said no. Halstead closed her briefcase. Then you're going to trial. I didn't do anything. The jury won't care. Ray looked at her. If I testify, Gary goes to prison. If you don't, you both do. Ray shook his head. I'm not doing it. Halstead stood up. Then I'll see you in court. She left. Ray sat in the consultation room and thought about Gary folding the tarp, thought about Dennis standing back with his hands in his pockets, thought about Marcus on his bike with the engine running, waiting to leave. He thought about the fire road and the way the dust had hung in the air behind them. He thought about the call he didn't remember making. And he thought about the fact that no one had called him. Not Gary, not Dennis, not Marcus. No one. A guard came and took him back to his cell. Ray lay on the bunk and stared at the ceiling and felt the weight of something he couldn't name pressing down on his chest. Ray's trial began in February. The courtroom was small and cold and smelled like floor polish. Ray sat at the defense table in a borrowed suit that didn't fit right. Halstead sat beside him with her briefcase open and her legal pad covered in notes she'd written but never referenced. The prosecution called Agent Collier first. He walked through the timeline, the drone footage, the fire road, the crates, the phone call. He showed the jury the aerial photos. 4 motorcycles stopped on restricted land. 4 men standing around a tarp. He showed them the printout of Ray's phone records. The outgoing call to the prepaid cell. 4 minutes, 18 seconds. Halstead cross-examined. She asked if the ATF had recovered any physical evidence tying Ray to the missing firearms. Collier said no. She asked if they'd found Ray's fingerprints on the crates. Collier said no. She asked if they'd traced the prepaid cell back to anyone. Collier said not yet. So you have a phone call, Halstead said. That's it. The timing is significant, Collier said. Significant isn't proof. It's enough. The jury looked at Ray. He sat with his hands folded on the table and didn't look back. The prosecution called Dennis next. He'd been subpoenaed. He came in wearing work clothes and sat in the witness box with his shoulders square and his face blank. The prosecutor asked him to describe what happened on the fire road. Dennis did. He kept it short. They'd stopped, they'd looked, they'd left. The prosecutor asked if Ray had made any phone calls that night. Dennis said he didn't know. You shared a motel, the prosecutor said. Rooms next to each other. You didn't see him on his phone? No. Did he seem nervous? We all seemed nervous. Why? Because we'd just found 100 guns in the middle of nowhere. The prosecutor showed Dennis the phone records. Do you recognize this number? Dennis looked at it. No. Ray never mentioned it? No. Did he mention calling anyone? No. Did he mention knowing anyone in the area? No. The prosecutor thanked him. Halstead declined to cross-examine. Dennis left the stand and walked out of the courtroom without looking at Ray. The prosecution called Marcus next. He came in wearing a tie and a button-down shirt. He looked thinner than Ray remembered. He sat in the witness box and wouldn't meet Ray's eyes. The prosecutor asked the same questions. Marcus gave the same answers. No, he didn't see Ray make any calls. No, Ray didn't mention knowing anyone. No, Ray didn't act suspicious. The prosecutor asked if Ray had opened any of the crates. Marcus said no. Who did? Dennis opened one, Gary opened another. What did Gary do after he opened it? He looked inside, then he closed it. Did he say anything? No. Did Ray say anything? No. Did anyone say anything? Marcus hesitated. Gary said we needed to go. And you left? Yes. Immediately? Yes. The prosecutor showed Marcus the phone records. Did you call anyone that night? No. Did Dennis? I don't know. Did Gary? I don't know. But Ray did. Marcus looked at Ray for the first time. I don't know. Halstead stood up. Objection, speculation. The judge sustained. The prosecutor moved on. He asked Marcus if the group had discussed what to do about the guns. Marcus said no. You didn't talk about it at all? No. Not in Reno, not on the ride home? No. Why not? Marcus looked down. Because we didn't want to. Why didn't you want to? Because we knew we should have reported it and we didn't. The courtroom was quiet. The prosecutor nodded and sat down. Halstead stood but didn't approach the witness box. Mr. Lyle, she said, did Ray Ochoa do anything illegal on that fire road? No. Did he touch the guns? No. Did he take anything? No. Did he tell you he was going to call anyone? No. Did he act like he had something to hide? Marcus thought about it. No more than the rest of us. Halstead sat down. Marcus left the stand. He walked past Ray without looking at him. The prosecution called Gary last. He came in wearing a jacket and jeans. He sat in the witness box and looked directly at Ray. His expression was unreadable. The prosecutor asked Gary to describe the ride. Gary did. He explained the detour, the fire road, the tarp, the crates, the decision to leave. The prosecutor asked whose idea it was to take the fire road. Gary said it was his. Why did you take it? I thought it was faster. Had you been on it before? I thought I had. But you weren't sure? No. So you led your group onto restricted land without knowing where you were going. Gary didn't answer. The prosecutor showed him the phone records. Did you make any calls that night? No. Did Dennis? I don't know. Did Marcus? I don't know. Did Ray? Gary looked at the printout. I don't know. You don't know if your friend made a 4-minute phone call from the room next to yours? No. The prosecutor leaned on the witness box. Mr. Tennant, do you think Ray Ochoa called someone to tell them about those guns? Gary looked at Ray. Ray looked back. For a moment, neither of them moved. No, Gary said. Then who made the call? I don't know. Someone did. I know. But it wasn't Ray. I don't think so. You don't think so, or you know? Gary exhaled. I don't know. The prosecutor sat down. Halstead stood up. Mr. Tennant, she said, how long have you known Ray Ochoa? 15 years. Do you trust him? Yes. Has he ever lied to you? No. Has he ever done anything to make you question his character? No. Do you believe he would sell out his friends for money? Gary looked at Ray again. No. Do you believe he made that phone call? Gary was quiet for a long time. The courtroom waited. The jury watched him. Ray watched him. No, Gary said finally. I don't. Halstead nodded. Thank you. Gary left the stand. He walked past Ray and stopped for just a second. Their eyes met. Then Gary kept walking. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They came back with a verdict just before 5 p.m. Ray stood when the judge asked him to. Halstead stood beside him. The foreman read the verdict. Guilty on 1 count of conspiracy to traffic in firearms. Guilty on 1 count of failure to report a felony. Not guilty on possession. Ray didn't move. Halstead put a hand on his shoulder. The judge set sentencing for 4 weeks out and dismissed the jury. The bailiff came to take Ray back into custody. Halstead said she'd file an appeal. Ray nodded but didn't say anything. They took him out through the side door. In the hallway, he saw Gary standing near the exit. Dennis was beside him. Marcus was there too, standing a few feet back with his hands in his pockets. Ray stopped. The bailiff stopped with him. Gary took a step forward but didn't say anything. Dennis looked at the floor. Marcus met Ray's eyes for a second, then looked away. Ray wanted to say something. He wanted to tell them it wasn't him. He wanted to ask them why no one had called. He wanted to ask if they believed him. He didn't say anything. The bailiff moved him forward. Ray walked past them and out the door. Sentencing came 4 weeks later. The judge gave Ray 36 months in federal prison. With good behavior, he'd served 27. Halstead said it could have been worse. Ray didn't respond. They processed him at the Federal Correctional Institution in Sheridan, Oregon. He was assigned to a medium security unit. He worked in the kitchen. He kept his head down. He didn't talk about why he was there. Gary called Halstead twice to ask how Ray was doing. Halstead said she couldn't share that information. Gary didn't call again. Dennis didn't call at all. Marcus sent a letter 6 months after the sentencing. It was short. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't know what else to say. He said he hoped Ray was okay. Ray read the letter once and put it in a drawer. He didn't write back. Gary stopped riding in March. He sold the bike in April. He didn't tell anyone. He just posted it online, and a guy from Nampa came with cash and drove it away on a trailer. Gary's wife asked why he sold it. He said he was done with it. She didn't ask anything else. Dennis kept riding, but he rode alone. He took the same routes he'd always taken, but he didn't enjoy them anymore. Every time he passed an unmarked road or a fire trail, he thought about September and the dust and the tarp folded in the dirt. He thought about Ray sitting in a cell. He thought about the phone call that didn't make sense. He thought about the fact that he hadn't called Ray, hadn't written, hadn't done anything. He told himself it was because there was nothing to say. He knew that wasn't true. Marcus kept teaching. He kept showing up. He kept grading papers and running parent-teacher conferences and eating lunch alone in his classroom. Students asked if he still rode motorcycles. He said no. They asked why. He said he just didn't anymore. In May, Marcus got a letter from Ray's lawyer. It included a visitor request form. Ray wanted to see him. Marcus put the form on his desk and looked at it for 3 days. Then he threw it away. Ray served 22 months. He got out in December on supervised release. Halstead picked him up from Sheridan and drove him back to Elko. The hardware store was under new management. Ray's apartment had been rented to someone else. His bike was in storage. He retrieved it and rode it to a motel on the edge of town and checked in for a week while he figured out what to do next. He thought about calling Gary. He thought about calling Dennis. He thought about calling Marcus. He didn't call anyone. He got a job at a warehouse in Battle Mountain. He rented a room in a house with 2 other guys who didn't ask questions. He worked, he ate, he slept, he didn't ride. 3 months after he got out, he saw Dennis at a gas station off I-80. Dennis was filling his bike. Ray was filling his truck. They saw each other across the pumps. Neither of them moved. Dennis finished first. He hung up the nozzle and got on his bike. He looked at Ray one more time. Ray looked back. Dennis started the engine and rode away. Ray finished filling his truck and went inside to pay. The clerk asked if he was okay. Ray said he was fine. The clerk didn't look convinced. Ray drove back to Battle Mountain and went to work and didn't think about it again. Gary heard about Ray's release from his lawyer. Pressler called to let him know. He said Ray had completed his sentence. He said there were no additional charges. He said the case was closed. Gary thanked him and hung up. His wife asked who it was. Gary said it was nothing. She didn't believe him, but she didn't push. That night, Gary sat in his garage and looked at the empty space where the bike used to be. He thought about the fire road. He thought about the way Ray had looked at him in the courtroom. He thought about the phone call and the empty crates and the way everything had fallen apart because of a decision he'd made in less than 10 seconds. He pulled out his phone and opened the group text. The last message was still from Marcus. "See you Friday." Gary typed, "I'm sorry." He stared at it for a long time. Then he sent it. He waited. No one replied. 2 years after Ray's release, Marcus saw Gary at a gas station in Boise. Marcus was there for a conference. Gary was there buying coffee. They saw each other in the parking lot. Marcus stopped. Gary stopped. They looked at each other for a long moment. Then Marcus got in his car and drove away. Gary stood there with the coffee in his hand and watched him go. Dennis rode alone for 5 more years. Then he stopped. He sold the bike to a dealer in Boise and never looked back. People asked why. He said he was getting too old. They didn't ask anything else. He never told anyone about the fire road. He never told anyone about the crates. He never told anyone about Ray. Marcus stopped riding the year Ray went to prison. He kept the Sportster in his garage under a tarp. Sometimes he'd go out there and look at it. He never started it. He never sat on it. He just looked at it and thought about things he couldn't change. Gary never rode again. He took up woodworking. He made furniture in his garage. Chairs, tables, shelves. His wife said he was good at it. He didn't respond. Ray kept working at the warehouse. He moved to a better place. He paid his fines. He completed his probation. He didn't ride. He didn't call anyone. He didn't think about September anymore, or at least he told himself he didn't. But sometimes late at night he'd think about the fire road. He'd think about the tarp and the crates and the decision they'd made without speaking. He'd think about the phone call he couldn't remember making. And he'd think about the fact that no one had called. Not once. Not ever. The group text stayed silent. Gary's last message, "I'm sorry," sat there unread. Or maybe it had been read and ignored. Gary didn't know. He never deleted it. He never sent another one. Dennis never opened the text. He'd turned off notifications years ago. Marcus had deleted the entire thread. Ray had changed his number. In the end, the fire road was closed permanently. The BLM put up new gates and new signs and new cameras. No one rode it anymore. The crates were never recovered. The firearms were never found. The prepaid cell was never traced. The case file stayed open but inactive. Agent Collier moved to a different assignment. The prosecutor moved to private practice. Halstead retired, and 4 men who used to ride together went back to their separate lives and never spoke again. 10 years after the fire road, Gary Tennant was driving through eastern Oregon on business. He was alone. He took State Route 78 because it was the fastest way. He passed the junction where he'd turned off that day in September. He slowed. He looked at the dirt road. The gate was closed. The signs were new. The grass had grown over the tire ruts. He thought about stopping. He didn't. He kept driving. That night in a motel in Burns, he opened his phone and looked at the group text. The last message was still there. "I'm sorry." He thought about deleting it. He didn't. He turned off the phone and went to sleep. Dennis Kowalski died of a heart attack at 68. He was alone when it happened. They found him in his house 3 days later. The obituary was short. It mentioned his work at the grain elevator. It mentioned his military service. It didn't mention motorcycles. Gary saw the obituary online. He read it twice. He thought about going to the funeral. He didn't go. Marcus saw it too. He sent flowers. He didn't sign the card. Ray didn't see it. He wasn't looking. Marcus Lyle retired from teaching at 61. He moved to a small town in Montana and bought a house with land. He never married. He never rode again. Students from over the years would sometimes reach out. He'd respond politely but briefly. No one ever asked about the Sportster. He kept it in his garage until he died. His estate sold it for $800. Ray Ochoa worked at the warehouse until he couldn't anymore. His back gave out. His knees gave out. He moved to a trailer park outside of Elko and lived on disability and Social Security. He didn't talk to his neighbors. He didn't make friends. Once a year, on September 27th, he'd think about the fire road. He'd think about the tarp and the crates. He'd think about the 4-minute phone call he never made. He never figured out who did. Gary Tennant lived to 73. His wife died 2 years before him. His kids visited occasionally. They asked about his life. He told them stories about work and woodworking and the house he'd built. He never mentioned motorcycles. He never mentioned the fire road. He never mentioned the 3 men he used to ride with. Before he died, he deleted the group text. The road doesn't forgive. It only remembers. And sometimes that's enough.